Welcome to the Plant-Centered and Thriving podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Kitchens. Welcome back to the show. My name is Ashley, and today I have a very special local guest with me named Lenore. She is the founder and animal care director of Piedmont Farm Animal Refuge. So if you're local to the Raleigh-Durham area, you may have heard of Piedmont Farm Animal Refuge. And at the end, we do talk about ways that you can get involved if that's something you're interested in. Lenore also goes into detail about the difference between zoos and animal sanctuaries. And we also even go into detail about some of their residents and the stories. Every animal at the refuge has a story, and she takes some time to share a story with us, which I found very, very impactful. Lenore has nearly a decade of experience working with and enriching the lives of animals. Her commitment and passion to helping farm animals stems from her core beliefs in kindness, justice, and compassion for all living creatures. In 2012, Lenore founded the Refuge in Pittsboro, North Carolina, where she leads a team of committed volunteers and staff in taking care of some of the most special individuals you will ever meet, the beloved animal residents. And I have witnessed this firsthand when I visited the refuge of just how much they care and how every animal has a very, very beautiful story and every animal has a name. It is such a great place to visit. She also talks about different ways that you can get involved with sanctuaries that are local to you. And we have a bunch of information in the show notes if that's what you're looking to do as well. So please join me in welcoming Lenore to the show. Welcome to the podcast, Lenore.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
We are excited to have you. So before we get into all the details about the Piedmont Refuge, we would love to hear you just kick us off by sharing your story and how you got started into going vegan first before starting the refuge.
Yeah, absolutely. I was an environmental studies major at Oakland College, which is a small liberal arts college in Northern Ohio, and that's where I grew up. And as part of the environmental studies department there, we were encouraged to take a lot of interdisciplinary classes. So I was in an environmental philosophy class, and we touched on all sorts of subjects, one of the subjects being animal rights. And it was the first time that I had really thought about a lot of these things. And my professor gave me an assignment that I was going to be in a two-person debate, and I was going to debate that it was ethical to eat animals and their products, and the other person was supposed to debate that it was not ethical. And so we had to do all of our independent research, kind of build our arguments, and then we were going to stand up in front of the class and deliver our arguments as best as we could. And so it was through that process of critically thinking about the ethics behind these choices that I started to realize there really isn't a strong ethical argument to eating animals and their products. So, I essentially, through that process, had my eyes opened and became vegan at that time, basically due to that assignment and due to that professor. So it was a really interesting way to get there. And I wish everyone was forced to sort of be in a class like that, or to be, made to think critically about these issues, because it's really easy in our society to just kind of do what everybody else is doing and not think critically about so many issues, relating to social justice. So I was really lucky and grateful that that experience came to me. And in fact, one of our animals at the refuge is named Professor Tim in honor of that professor
Oh,
who basically started my journey and is the reason that we're all here.
oh, that is so cool. What a unique story. I wonder if your professor even intended for his students to do that, to possibly for that to spark them on possibly a journey of going vegan.
Yeah, it's a good question. And unfortunately, he passed away unexpectedly at a young age, and I was never able to tell him the impact he had had on me. We were lucky enough to have some of his close family actually visit the refuge, visit Professor Tim the Duck. They
Oh,
have a big, frame portrait of him, and so they know the connection and they know the story. And I hope he touched many other students, not just me.
yeah, I'm sure he did. Yeah, what a cool story. So that obviously led eventually into you starting Piedmont Farm Animal Refuge. So how did that end up coming about?
Right. So I was vegan, I think, for about 6 years before I started to think more about what else I could do. I have a background in working with children with autism. And I was doing that, kind of all through those years, started doing that in middle school, through high school, through college, and afterwards. And I started to think about animals. I started to think, well, what kind of job or career could I have that would help shine the light on some of these issues, specifically for farmed animals? And I knew nothing about animal sanctuaries. I started researching online and I come across Farm Sanctuary. They have a big online presence. And I'm like, wow, this sounds amazing. This sounds like something I'd really like to do. Of course, I had absolutely no experience working with animals or running a nonprofit or anything like that. So I started then on a journey that took about 5 years where I was able to work, intern, and volunteer at a variety of animal sanctuaries to get that experience and to actually find out, is this something I want to do? Because there's a lot of things about it, about just like with any career, you may have an idea what it is, and then it turns out it's very different than that. So that was a really important phase for me and a discovery period. So after that time had passed, I got to the point where I felt like, there's always more to learn and I'm still learning every day. But I had enough knowledge that I could start the Refuge. And so we were founded in 2012. So this year we're actually celebrating 10 years, a big
Yeah.
milestone.
Yes, it is. Congratulations. That's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like an overwhelming process to think about starting an animal refuge. How did that eventually come about? Like, what were some of the things that you needed to get things going? And obviously, eventually you'll need animals, but I'm sure there's so much more that you need before you bring the animals to the place.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of understanding of how a nonprofit operates and functions. So, one of the first things I did was I started going to all the little vegan, vegetarian meetup groups, in the area and just meeting people and saying, hey, I'm looking to put a board of directors together. Who would be interested? Like, this is the vision, this is the dream. Who wants to be a part of that? That was one of the first things. Also, there's a lot of paperwork. How do you get your 501c3 status? All of that. And of course, finding land to do this because for an animal sanctuary, and particularly one that intends to have large animals who need a lot of space, that's one of the most critical elements. So we spent about a year looking for the right piece of land in the right location, the right size, the right mix of woods and pasture and all those things. So yeah, it was many steps. Our first event was actually a vegan bake sale, and it was a great way to meet people in the area and kind of tell them this is our vision. And we
Mm.
started to get an email list, of the local people. So when we launched our first fundraiser, which was for our chicken and turkey house, already had a small base of people to go to and say, hey, do you want to be a part of this, help us make this happen. So yeah, it was a lot of paperwork and somewhat non-interesting things that you have to do in the beginning to kind of set it up so everything is in order. Animal sanctuaries start in many different ways. Sometimes people rescue one animal and then they're like, this animal has inspired me and I want to
Mm.
go start a sanctuary. For me, I like to do things in a very sustainable and orderly way. We did not rescue a single animal until we had everything in place that we needed for that animal. And, we had some support, even funding that backing us up because rescuing an animal is one thing, but caring for them for their life requires a lot of
Mm.
resources.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, today we have about 120 animals who live at the refuge.
Wow.
And we started with chickens and turkeys. We moved into goats and sheep, and then ducks and geese. And we are very shortly going to be welcoming cows. So the journey continues. Our intention is to rescue pigs as well. So that's the current vision. We're moving into some of the larger animals now that require a lot of more space, infrastructure. You have to have all the equipment, trailers, tractors, all of that. So I'm excited about the future, but it's definitely been a journey.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure it has. I'm sure it's been there's been a lot of learning lessons along the way. It sounds like too there you don't see really a ceiling yet to what you're capable of doing. Like you said, your refuge, it's ever evolving, ever growing, and you're just seeing how you can take on more animals as you're able to.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, something really exciting for us is that we were able to acquire some additional acreage just adjacent to our current sanctuary. So we started with 16 acres, we moved up to 20, and now we're at 45. So we have all this potential to be able to rescue more animals in need, especially some of the larger animals that need that space. So I'm super excited for the future and what we're going to be able to do with that land.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. And speaking of animals, you have a couple pictured behind you. I know those watching this can see them. Those of you listening can't. Could you tell us a little bit about their story? I had the privilege of visiting Piedmont a few months ago, and we went through and met a lot of the goats, and every goat had a story, which I thought was so cool. And I know that every animal who comes to your refuge has a story, and you're able to share that with the people who visit. So I would love for you to even just share a little bit more, maybe just about the goats behind you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, every animal at the refuge has a name and has a story, and they all come from some kind of background of abuse, neglect, abandonment. When they come to the refuge, they're here for life, and it's our job to help them heal from the past and take care of them to the best that we can. And we have a memorial area. When animals pass away, they're buried on site. We hang a little medallion for them, but this is truly, the home. It's their last place to be, which for a lot of our animals, they get moved around quite a bit and it's, stressful. They never know when they're, going one place or another. So that's something that's important to us is for them to have just a place to be and not have that stress anymore. Some of the first animals from the goats we rescued were these ones you're talking about that are behind me, Sweet Mama and her son Ace. So Sweet Mama was a dairy goat, and she lived 6, 7 years on a dairy farm every year being bred, every year having her baby taken away. That process could start over again, and those babies could be sold or used in the dairy depending on if they were male or female. And after this happened, year after year after year after year, her body started to break down because it's very unnatural amount of reproduction and milk production that happens on these farms. They're basically, these animals are kept either constantly pregnant or constantly lactating, and then the process is started all over again year after year. So she started to not give as much milk out, and unfortunately, as is the case on dairy farms, whether we're talking about goats, sheep, or cows, she was then sent to a slaughter auction because the farmer, deemed her as spent. She's not giving enough that's in terms of value. It's costing X amount to feed. Well, this animal isn't giving us in return what we need. So that would have been the end of her story. That's the end of many animal stories. But Sweet Mama, as we would find out later from her, living at the sanctuary and getting to see her personality, she was a fighter. She ended up escaping auction, jumping fences, run across a road, and she made her way to a nearby farm that had cows. And luckily, this kind woman was coming to this farm to feed a bunch of feral cats there. And she saw this poor little goat. Sweet Mama was skinny. She had overgrown hooves. She was hobbling around. How she escaped was just pure ill. So this woman felt, you know, terrible for her, and she took it into her heart and said, "Well, you're going to become part of my feeding routine." So she would be bringing out food for the cats, and she would be tending to Sweet Mama, and the farmer there with the cow said, "That's fine, feed this little goat." Well, a couple weeks into this routine, this woman arrives to find Sweet Mama in the middle of giving birth to two little kids, one
Oh
of them
my
being Ace.
goodness. Wow.
So she had actually been pregnant that entire time. And, she had not only saved her life, but she had saved the lives of her two kids. And at this point, everyone said, wait a minute, we got to find a safe home where this goat family can stay together. And so luckily we had just finished the goat housing at the refuge. It was perfect timing. They found us somehow through the internet, and this little goat family arrived. And I'll never forget, sweet mama was so protective.
Mm.
This was the first time she was able to have babies that she could nurse and raise, and she was not going to give them up. She didn't know who we were. She didn't know what our intentions were. And she stood in front of them, stamping her foot at us and would not let them come over. And, they eventually, she said, it's okay. And they were very friendly, but it took her quite a while to realize, hey, this is actually a safe place and this is going to be all right. And for us, it was really special. She lived a couple of years with us until she passed away, unfortunately, from a disease that's very common in the dairy industry. And, a lot of goats don't live to their full lifespan because of this. But the last couple of years she got to be with her kids. And every day they were a snuggle pile, even when the babies grew up. In the picture behind me, Ace is cuddling her. I mean, he was mama's boy. You could not tell where one goat and the other ended. The three of them were just one. So
Aw.
that's some of the magic that sanctuary provide is these animals can actually stay with their families. Most farm animals never get that. They have, separation year after year. So Sweet Mama was one of my personal heroes because, she was, I feel like the epitome of a strong woman, a strong mother. She took matters into her own hands. She was an incredible mother to her kids and just had so much bravery.
That's such a beautiful story. And I appreciate how when you do come to visit the refuge that you're able to share with the people who visit the story of every animal there if you want to listen, because you really could probably spend hours talking about each animal and their story and their history, which is so beautiful. And I know even just recently, and we'll talk about where to find you on social media, but you also share stories even just on your social media about new animals that come to the refuge and maybe where they came from and their story. So I do appreciate your transparency about that as well, because I think it's important for us to hear those stories.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, for people who are local who can come to meet the animals in person, that's a wonderful thing. But we really do understand the power that these animals have and their stories have. So, we live in a digital age where we can, reach a lot of people with those messages and hopefully make a better world for everyone.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. One thing that I wanted to ask you, Lenore, is kind of pivoting a little bit into talking about animal sanctuaries, animal refuges, and how those differ from going and visiting a zoo.
Yeah, that's a good question. The primary difference is sort of there's an ethical backbone to what is a zoo doing and what is a sanctuary doing. At a sanctuary, the primary mission and concern is the well-being of the animals. Sanctuaries are not breeding animals into captivity. They are, rescuing animals from situations where they, are in need for whatever reason that may be. And for the most part, sanctuaries are providing a lifelong home to these animals. At zoos, while there may be some educational component and some rescue that happens, primarily these animals are just sort of on display for humans to sort of just be amused by. And there's a lot of captive breeding that goes on so that these animals can be sold. They get moved around from zoo to zoo. Families, aren't kept together, that the animals' interests are not at the forefront.
Mm.
So, there's a lot of variety when it comes to zoos. How much education do they engage in? How much rescue work do they do? But fundamentally, zoos are, I would say, exploitative of animals, whereas sanctuaries are trying to provide a safe home and really have the animals as the first priority. And one organization that I would recommend for people to look at is the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries. It's called GFAS for short. And this is a wonderful organization that, if you're curious about sanctuaries in your area that have actually been accredited, which means someone has come and looked at all aspects of the organization from animal care, to how the finances are dealt with and said, this organization meets, these requirements. It's an awesome website. It has a really cool interactive map, so you can look up, your area, your state, and kind of learn what sanctuaries are in your area. And I encourage you to go support those sanctuaries because they're absolutely doing wonderful work.
Oh, that's good to know. And we'll include that link in the show notes. So if you just want to click below when this podcast is over, you can do that. Just check it out and see if there's one near you, because I know that was something that when I moved to this area, I looked up just out of curiosity, and it was neat to see that Piedmont was not too far. It's a little under an hour from me. So, which is fantastic. Kind of along those lines too, Lenore, there's a common question out there of the language that we use around animals. So why we choose maybe to use the term livestock versus farm animals, or even use the words like beef or bacon and not cow or pig. Could you maybe just elaborate a little bit more on that?
I think there is an intentional disconnect between us as, humans and the general public, and then the animals that are eaten. And there's a lot that's done by the food industry to make sure that that disconnect is there. Because I think when we're using terms like it's a cow or it's a pig, that brings to mind certain images of these animals usually being alive. And when we are able to come up with these terms that disassociate us from that image, it's much easier to engage in eating these animals and really not thinking about them as individuals. Most of us go to the store, there's something wrapped up in a package that we buy, and it's ground beef or, a pork loin or whatever it may be. And we're not thinking at all about who that animal was, what kind of life they had. And that's really ingrained in our society because I'm an optimistic person and I have seen through the years of work at Refuge that people are inherently connected to animals. Most people would not want animals to be treated the way that they are in the farming industry. Unless you have money yet or you're like a psychopath, any person who sees that is going to say, I don't want animals to be treated that way. That's horrible. But yet we're going and we're buying these products and we're supporting that. So by making those connections, which is a big part of the work that we do here at the Refuge, we're trying to eat away at that disconnect and talk about these issues, not only abstractly, this is a pig or this is a cow or this is a goat, but here's the actual individual that you're meeting with your own eyes, and this is their story. And we've been, I've seen a lot of people have their minds and hearts open through that experience.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. I think it'd be really hard not to have your mind and your heart opened, when you're really immersed in it and when you come visit your refuge, especially after hearing all the stories and everything. And Lenore, I know at the refuge too, you create like a special living environment for the animals. And I know you have a special term for it. Could you describe what that's like? Because I know it's so much more than just bringing some animals onto a farm and having them, taken care of in a fenced in area. It sounds like it's much more complicated than that.
We are very lucky. My partner Paul comes from a background of design and knowledge of how to also build. He's an architect who works at a small firm here in North Carolina. But everything that we have built at the refuge in terms of the animal housing and even some of the infrastructure for people has been designed by Paul. And he's really looking at these animals in the same way that as an architect you would talk to any client. So, if you have someone who wants to build a house, you might ask them questions like, well, how do you like to spend your day? You'd want to get into how does that being need to use the space? What kind of wants and desires, what kind of needs, but also what kind of wants do they have? And for our process of animal centered architecture, he also likes to do a lot of research in terms of who are these animals' natural ancestors? Because these are all domesticated animals that have been, taken out of those environments and put into very sort of artificial farms where the first need in a lot of those buildings and structures is ease for humans or use of the animal. If you think about a traditional barn, those are the kind of driving force behind it. Whereas for sanctuaries, our first priority is what's best for the animal. And so through that animal centered design process, we are attempting to create for each species a living environment, both indoor and outdoor, that we hope is best suited to them. And this is a concept. We're not necessarily saying our duck house is the perfect duck house, but what we're saying is our duck house was built with ideas of like, what would a duck build if they could have their own house? What would it look like and why? And just this is one attempt at trying to create a house that a duck might build if they could. And so there could be 10 other ways to do that that would be just as interesting. But just kind of breaking away from the idea of that traditional barn and, the way it looks, the way it's structured, trying to erase that and instead start from the animal. And so we're really lucky to have Paul and those, skills as part of our team. And I think it's manifested in a really interesting landscape at the refuge in terms of how the housing looks, what kind of environments the animals are put in. For example, there's a lot of wooded areas that our animals have as part of their outdoor environment, which is not what you always think of when you think of, chickens or goats on a farm. You usually think of them in a pasture. But when you take that time to look at their ancestry, look at their natural habitats, you learn some really interesting things. For example, chickens come from a rainforest environment. The
Hmm.
pasture is about the most opposite of what they would want for a variety of reasons. And so once you're kind of armed with this knowledge, you can start to put that into effect in terms of how you take care of the animals, what kinds of things you can provide. So I'm really proud of that work, and I'm excited, especially with the new cows coming, what they're going to think of the new house, because there was a lot time and thought put into what a cow would want.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, I got to see a little glimpse of it and it looked beautiful. So I'm excited to see it when it's all said and done and to come back and visit. Yeah. Lenore, I did not know that about chickens, that they came from a rainforest environment. So it's
I
cool.
know. I didn't know it either. Yeah, most
Yeah.
people don't.
No. So
Hmm.
it's cool to hear you think of like going back and thinking about, okay, where do these animals come from? Where do their ancestors? What did they prefer? And kind of trying to emulate that environment at Piedmont Farm Animal Refuge.
Yeah, and I think that's a big part of sort of what humans need to be doing when they're thinking about farmed animals is we're taught a lot about them in our society, and most of the things we're taught are untrue. Pigs are dirty, chickens are stupid. A lot of those sayings that we have belittle animals, especially farmed animals. um, and it's a lot of that is subconscious, and it's just sort of taken as well, that's these things are true. So there's an unlearning that we need to do when it comes to these animals to really get at the root of, are they really? And so, visiting a sanctuary and meeting animals is a great place to start with that. But there's so much you can learn online in terms of researching these animals' backgrounds, and it's just fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure it is. That's really neat. I appreciate you sharing that because that is really neat to think about. When people do come to the refuge, what kind of maybe common questions do you hear, or what kind of things are brought up maybe when they come visit for the first time, or even when they come back?
One interesting discussion that we always have at the refuge revolves around eggs, because people are always curious. What are you doing with the eggs? Do you eat them? Do you sell them? What happens? Because to learn about the biology of who chickens are now, it's kind of complicated, but chickens, hens are going to be just laying eggs, regardless if there's a rooster present or any kind of fertilization is happening. At this point, they've been bred over many, many, many years to lay eggs. Well, of course, if you look at any other bird, they're not just laying an egg every day or a couple of days. That would be a huge waste of resources and frankly bizarre. So, to learn that their ancestor lays only 6 to 12 eggs a year and that they're laid in clutches, just like birds will lay at the time, a robin will make a nest and lay in the spring, and then she's not going to lay until, the season comes around again. So chickens sort of are in this weird place where they've been designed to do this thing that's very unnatural and unfortunately causes a lot of harm to them. There's a lot of issues with egg production in terms of reproductive cancers, malfunctions, infections. Eggs get caught up in there and mummified, and just horrible things because the body is doing something that nature did not intend it to do. So there's so much more to learn about chickens and eggs. But when farm sanctuaries first began, and some of the first ones started in the 1980s, all of a sudden there were these animals who were being bred on these farms who lived only a year or two, and now they're being taken care of into 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years of age. And there was a big question and a big kind of learning curve in terms of how do we care for these animals? What do they need to keep their bodies healthy? And for chickens, what was learned over many years in the sanctuary community was that returning the egg to them to replace those lost nutrients was something that not only they love and they will readily eat, but also will elongate their lives and keep them healthier over time. So there's a lot more, to learn about that, but that's something that many people have maybe never heard of before. They maybe think, is that bizarre, is that wrong? But it's really interesting, and I encourage people to learn even more about it. It's a very complicated topic, chickens and eggs and what's best for them. And for us, we follow in the footsteps of those many sanctuaries that have learned this knowledge over time. Our ultimate goal is what's best for the birds, and
Yeah.
so our eggs go back to them as either a form of enrichment, just a snack, or particular hens that we have who lay so many eggs, they actually get that as part of their regular diet to supplement a lot of those lost nutrients. So there's farm animals are fascinating, and there's the more you learn, the more there is to learn.
I was going to say, when you were in college, I bet you didn't expect to be learning this much.
No, and I didn't learn any of this in college.
Yeah. So Lenore, if people want to get involved, what are some of the best ways for them to do that? Maybe they have a little bit of extra time or a little bit of extra resources. Maybe what are some things that they can do to get involved with Piedmont?
Yeah. Well, we have a robust volunteering program, and our volunteers are absolutely the lifeblood of everything we do. We cannot do everything we do without them. And so we are always looking for more people to get involved. You don't need to know anything, you don't need to have any particular skill set or experience working with animals. There's so many different ways to be involved as a volunteer. People help in the office, they do animal care, they help with construction days, they even go to offsite events and help people learn about us. So if you're local to us, there's tons of way to get involved as a volunteer. In terms of other ways to support us, we're really, really excited about the new property we have. And we're going to be launching in the coming months a special fundraiser to work on a protective perimeter fence to install around this new property. And that's one of the first steps that we're going to have to take before we can start rescuing new animals or thinking about other infrastructure back there. And that we're also excited about because there is a lot of hunting in the area. And although our property is marked, hunters are still kind of moving through that space without that fence being there. And there's many deer and other lovely wildlife who call our sanctuary home in addition to our official residents. So we'd like to make it a safer space for everyone. So that's something you can keep an eye out for. We all have ways for you all to get involved directly with the animals. So you can choose to sponsor an individual animal at the refuge, and you will get a little packet with their portrait and their rescue story. And it's a monthly donation, and that really helps us be able to grow and expand and take in more animals, because we know month to month we have X amount coming in through our sponsors, or you can join us on Patreon in a similar way. Get a little behind the scene knowledge, learn about things before other people do. And that helps us grow. It helps us say, yeah, we have enough funding, we can take in a new animal.
And so monthly donors and even like sponsoring an animal, you can do that anywhere. You don't have to be local to do that. You can just go through your website to do that.
Absolutely. Yep. Our website, piedmontrefuge.org, has all the information you need. We're also very active on social media. So you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're also on TikTok.
Nice. So if people don't have a whole lot of time or maybe just financial resources, is like sharing things on social media, reposting your videos, is that helpful?
Absolutely. Sharing is always super helpful for us. Share, share, share. Talk to people about us who may be in the area, encourage them to come visit us or volunteer with us. If you're local, we also have, some events that are free of charge, or we have sliding scale available.
Yes. And I know on your website, I looked recently, and sometimes you'll have events where even food trucks come out and you really make an event out of it. I mean, it's a really enjoyable experience for everybody, which is really cool.
Yeah, we love to, partner with the local vegan businesses and food trucks, and it's just a win-win, and we're lucky that, gosh, every day there's more and more of them popping up. So it's really exciting time.
Yes, yes. I had the pleasure of going to a vegan Mexican cooking class at the Refuge, and it was phenomenal. The food was great, and obviously the meeting the animals and hearing their stories was wonderful as well. Well, Lenore, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and sharing a little bit more about Piedmont. What is the best place? We have tons of links in the show notes, y'all. So if you're curious to connect with Lenore and do that, please use those links below. But what are some of the best ways that they can reach out to you or connect to you online?
Yeah, I think our website is probably the best. And again, that's piedmontrefuge.org. Send us a message on social media, or you can email info@piedmontrefuge.org. And, whether it's, you have an interest in volunteering, or you know of an animal in need, you can reach out directly that way. So we
That's
hear
great.
from you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again so much, Lenore. We really appreciate you having on. And I just can't wait for people to get more involved and just see what you all are doing and continue to keep doing for the local animals.
Well, thanks so much for taking the time to have me. Really appreciate it. And yeah, best of luck.
Thanks. Thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time, keep thriving.